Okay, under the sixth trumpet, where the angel starts blasting, we're told that in Revelation 9, verse 15, and the four angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year to slay the third part of men. And I was looking at this time period and looking at where it fits in this prophetic history. And it actually brought me back to some more stuff from the fifth trumpet that I didn't first see. When we looked at the fifth trumpet, we saw that there was a 5-month period, and we looked at this being the rise of Islam, when they spread with this speed, taking over pretty much all of North Africa, and a lot of the Middle East. All these former Christian lands are taking them off the Eastern Roman Empire. So can somebody read Revelation 9 and verse 5?
And to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months. Sorry, and their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he striketh a man.
Can I get you to also read verse 10?
Verse 10, and they had tails like unto scorpions, and their stings were in their tails, and there were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men 5 months.
Now, what are the parallels between verse 5 and verse 10 there?
Not kill in 5 months.
Yep. Yeah, Galen?
Scorpions as well. Like we know that obviously in verse 5 it says the torment of a scorpion when he striketh a man. Yeah, scorpions strike with their tails, which is what we've got in verse 10.
Yeah, so we've got those 3 elements: the fact that they wouldn't kill but only hurt, that there would have this 5-month period, and the idea that it's the scorpions with their tails is what they're using to torment or to hurt. Ralph?
Verse 10 that talks about the sting. Verse 5 doesn't talk about the sting. Is there something in that?
I mean, verse 10 talks about the stings in their tails, whereas in verse 5 it mentions a scorpion when it striketh the man. So it doesn't mention it, but there's still sort of a parallel there. Scorpions strike with their stinger. So it's worded differently, just like in verse 5 it says that they should not kill them, where it doesn't say that in verse 10, but in verse 10 it says that their power was to hurt, not to kill. So in each verse it's worded differently, but there's still these parallels. Petra?
Also that it's aimed at men, not land, like we've seen earlier, that there were different things aimed at different parts of the land, but this is both aimed at men in verses 5 and 10.
Now, what is described in between these 2 verses? And if you can remember from when a couple of weeks back when we looked at this, what they were applied to, just a summary rather than every detail would be fine. Petra.
Sorry, didn't take the hand down before. Looks like a pretty violent sort of a time.
Mm-hmm. Jaylene.
I think the main, I'm probably wrong, but the main description seems to be about the locusts and the different aspects of them. Obviously, they're not real locusts. Everything is symbolic.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it describes them as horses prepared for battle, you know, teeth of lions, their breastplates, the sounds of their wings like the sounds of chariots. It's describing this battle imagery that's being carried out. Margaret.
It's a time when the 150 years when the Ottoman Empire attacked Eastern Rome and destroyed them.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Petra.
Something that stands out as a bit different is that men will seek death and not be able to find it.
Mm-hmm. Now, when I first read through this, my initial thing is that verse 10 is just repeating the same thing as verse 5. And it's just talking about the same 5 months. But when I was looking at this a bit more, it seems to be more that there are actually 2 5-month periods in this prophecy. That there's this intense period of 5 months at the beginning when they are tormenting and hurting, and a 5-month period at the end. And that is interesting. When I was looking at this, that's actually what we have. We looked at, with the rise of Islam, there was this 5-month period, which prophetically is 150 years. And when Muhammad first rose and started his sort of military conquest in 612 AD, 150 years later, in 762 AD, you know, the Islamic, the capital city of the Islamic Caliphate moved to, well, built Baghdad and relocated there, outside of the former Roman Empire. And their attacks on the Roman Empire really eased up. There was this rapid expansion for the first 150 years, and then things settled down. They're still back and forth a bit, but nothing like what was going on in that period of where they were tormenting and attacking that Eastern Roman Empire. And then later on, and this is what Margaret referred to, with the rise of the Ottomans, that was established in 1299, 150 years later, in 1449, that was another 150-year period of that rise of the Ottoman Empire. And at the end of that, the Emperor of the East in Constantinople actually became, I don't know what the official title was, but he ruled by permission, I think bequeathed to the Ottoman ruler. And so we actually have this 150-year period at both ends of this 5th trumpet, this first woe. Gaylene.
Was it in the first 150 years, wasn't it Muhammad's descendant or general or whoever it was, wasn't he the one that said that leave a particular type of men of God alone, but the ones that shave their heads? Is that the bit we're talking about?
Yes, yes, in that
Okay.
first 150 years. Yep.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Mm-hmm. And I will just share, actually, no, I'll jump back into the 6th trumpet, and then I'll share a little map of the Ottomans. So had those 2 time periods, and I think it's important because that second time period, that second 150 years, links with the start of this next time period we see under the 6th trumpet. Ralph.
Now you mentioned the first 150, that was the Arabian Muhammad. Oh, what were they? And the second lot of the Turks, is that right?
Do I have a map here? I think this is it here. Share screen. Okay. It's not the best quality there with the writings, but that there is what Islam conquered in the first 150 years. This Arabian Peninsula was in Muhammad's life itself, and then these are the next 2 caliphs conquered sort of up there into Spain, and right up through into Turkey and over into Iran on the other side of the Caspian Sea. So that was what Islam took in that first 150 years. So you can see that is the significant expansion. And if you think where the Roman Empire was, pretty much there from Italy straight down and across to the west, that was all taken over by the barbarians, or I should say, rather say the Germanic tribes, when the Western Empire fell. And then Islam in that first 150 years came up and took the rest of North Africa, Egypt, right up the coast of Israel and Syria, and through Turkey. That was the first 150 years, that first 5-month period of what they took. And it was, I'll show this here anyway. Now, you see these colors in the center here. This is what was taken in that last 5-month period. So all of this was already taken by Muslims, not by the Ottomans, but by Muslims. And then this next bit coming further into Europe, into the Eastern Empire, was taken that last 150 years. So can somebody read for me Revelation 9, verse 13 through 15?
And the 6th angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the 4 horns of the golden altar which is before God, saying to the 6th angel which had a trumpet, loose the 4 angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. And the 4 angels were loosed, which was prepared for an hour, a day, a month, a year, for to slay the 3rd part of men. Was that it, 13 to 15?
Yep.
Oh,
Yep.
thank you.
So in there, we've got it as time prophecy. An hour, a day, a month, and a year. Now, using the day for a year principle that we've used for everything else we've looked at so far, what does that bring us to in literal years? Galen.
It's 391 in the hour, which is an hour's what, 2 weeks?
Yeah, what was the
Well,
24th of,
if heaven is empty for the space of half an hour, and that's 7 days, then an hour would be 2 weeks.
so if I go 360 divided by 24, that equals 15 days. So you're just over 2 weeks.
Yeah. So 360 plus a month is 390 plus a day. Plus, so 391 years plus 15 days.
Mm-hmm. Now, if we take that last time prophecy that we ended up, that last 150 days from the fifth seal, that ended from, you know, the rise of the Ottoman Empire in 1299 to 1449. July 27th, 1449, when the Byzantine Emperor was crowned with permission of the Ottoman Sultan. So it wasn't destroyed, but it was put under the authority of the Ottoman Sultans. That ended the time period where they were only hurting and tormenting that Eastern Rome, but hadn't actually killed it. Then in this next time period, they kill it. They have power to slay. And so if we start that time period from 1449, July 27, and add that 391 years and 15 days, where does that take us?
The 11th of the 8th, 1840.
11th of August, 1840. And on that day, there was a bit of a reversal of fortunes. The Ottoman Sultan existed by permission of these European powers. Effectively, the exact reversal of positions that had established it at the beginning, when the Christian power in the East existed at permission of the Ottomans. Then at the end of that time period, now the Ottomans only existed by permission of these other Christian powers. And that prophecy holds special significance, which I'm sure many of you are aware. This was one that Josiah Litch made, that really validated that day-year principle, because this was a prediction that was made before it came to pass. That he had studied these prophecies, he worked out the day-year principle, and he predicted that day that on August 11th, 1840, the Ottoman Empire would lose its sovereignty to the Christian nations. And it came to pass exactly as predicted. So now we've got that time period part. I just want to look through some of these other aspects of what is coming out under this sixth angel. Now, the first thing we read there in verse 13 is that John heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar, which is before God's, saying to the sixth angel, which had the trumpet. Now, what is the significance we're going to look at? that the voices is coming out from the four horns of the golden altar. And where else have we seen the golden altar in Revelation particularly? Jaylene.
Wasn't that the one where the voices of the martyrs and such were coming out crying, "How long, O Lord"? Was that the fifth seal? Something?
Yes, under the fifth seal. It just mentions there were souls under the altar that were slain for the word of God and for their testimony. So it doesn't tell us it's a golden altar. That may be the altar of sacrifice or the altar of incense there.
So then, what then is, because the altar of sacrifice was made of brass or bronze, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Which had four horns. The only one that I can think of would be that was gold and had four horns was the altar of incense.
Yep.
So there are obviously prayers going up.
Mm-hmm. Can someone read Revelation 8, verse 3 to 5?
Then another angel with a gold incense burner came and stood at the altar, and a great amount of incense was given to him to mix with the prayers of God's people as an offering on the gold altar before the throne. The smoke of the incense, mixed with the prayers of God's holy people, ascended up to God from the altar where the angel had poured them out. Then the angel filled the incense burner with fire from the altar and threw it down upon the earth. And thunder crashed, lightning flashed, and there was a terrible earthquake.
So there is, as Galen mentioned, the altar is the altar of incense where prayers are being offered up. Now this is at the opening of the trumpet, we see this scene. And then under the sixth trumpet, we see the golden altar appear again, where the voices are crying out from the golden altar. So what do you think what is the significance of that? What's happening there at the beginning of chapter 8? And what role? Oh, sorry, what is the scene being played out there, and how does that help us understand what's happening?
Is that like intercessory prayer?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's what we were talking about with these end times and the rivalry of offense or defense, and how prayers were answered. A lot of it seems like it's, even when you go back to the 9th chapter in those 5 months both times, it seems almost like it's discipline. And the Lord is bringing them through it again just to make sure they've learned, and they haven't learned yet. And he's more or less asking, when are you going to learn?
Galen.
Wasn't it because it's an interlude. Those few verses are an interlude. Isn't it to give us a what's the word? Context as far as time and what's happening and why it's happening. Like there was context as far as judgment, and this is the why, or something to that effect.
Mm-hmm. Yep. This angel's offering up the prayers of the saints. And as you mentioned before, under the fifth seal, the saints are crying out and praying to God, asking for God to judge those that have persecuted his people. And when this angel offers up these prayers upon the golden altar, then the censer is filled and it's cast down to the earth, and there's judgment upon the earth because of the ascending of these prayers of the saints.
And it talks about the in verse 15 about the four angels who had been prepared for this hour. They were all ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
they were just waiting for the people to offer prayer, I guess, and allow the Lord to work. Huh?
Mm. Mm. So again, we have this scene where voices are coming out of that altar of incense, which is before God. You know, so this judgment is again in the intercession for the prayers of God's people. And I mentioned this before. I can't remember whether it's before we started the meeting, but there were many times when the Catholic armies were going to move in to destroy the Protestants. I believe it was Charles. I forget what number king it was. You know, Charles the whatever it was. But every time that the armies were going in to destroy the Protestants, the Ottomans, this power under the sixth trumpet, would rise up and launch an assault on the European Empire, and the Catholics would have to pull their armies away and go fight the Ottomans. You know, many historians have said that without the Turks, there would be no Protestantism. Martin Luther himself even commented on this, saying that to fight against the Turks would be to fight against, to fight against the Turks would be to rebel against God, just paraphrasing. Because he said the Turks are God's appointed agents to punish the Catholics for their apostasy. Yes, yes, as Mark put in the comments, the Ottomans protected the Protestants back then. I even found a couple of references, although I wasn't able to follow them up, with saying that there was actually agreements between several Protestant kings and the Ottomans, sort of unofficial alliances against the Catholics. So absolutely, this power of the Ottomans under the sixth trumpet rose in response to the prayers of the Protestants, to the intercession coming out of the golden altar. This power rose to bring judgment upon the apostasy that was persecuting God's people. Now, what do these voices, what do they say to the sixth angel which had the trumpet? So just remember that it's Charles V was one of the main Roman Catholic kings.
Are the voices slightly different because there's only one voice here in 13?
Mm-hmm.
It's like this ministering angel, whether it's Jesus or not, because he gives the order to the sixth angel to loose the four angels.
Okay. So what? So it's to loose the four angels. which abound in the great river Euphrates. What's the significance of the Euphrates?
It goes through Babylon.
Yep, Babylon was built on top of the river Euphrates. Can someone read Revelation 16:12?
And the sixth angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and the water thereof was dried up, that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared. So sixth trumpet, sixth vial, that's the plagues, isn't it? The final plagues?
Yep. So it was, the river Euphrates was dried up to prepare the way for the kings of the east. And historically, Babylon fell when the Medo-Persians under Cyrus came from the east, and they diverted the river Euphrates away, so the river dried up, and they walked under the city gates and overthrew Babylon. And so here again, Euphrates being dried up, preparing the way for what was to come next from the king of the east. And under the next seal, where are we? In verse 19, you read, "And the great city was divided into three parts, and the cities of the nation fell, and great Babylon came in remembrance before God." So again, what happened to the Euphrates here is leading up to this destruction of Babylon. If we can turn to Jeremiah, the book of Jeremiah, chapter 51, and verse 63 and 64. Galen.
Is there any, because we've got heaps of thirds in the early trumpets, we've got thirds in the sixth trumpet, but we've got the city was divided into three parts, so it's thirds again. Is there a whole thing with that? Because being the final plagues, there's no mercy. There's no mercy, yeah. So, is there something different happening to each third, or?
Yeah. Where are we? Back in 1619. This judgment doesn't just fall on a third part of the city.
I understand
Babylon
that.
comes into remembrance, and it's divided into three parts. Yeah, and then she was made to drink of the wine of the wrath of his fierceness, and then every island fled away, and the mountains were not found, and great hail fell from heaven. Yeah, the weight of a talent, which was rather large hailstones. I don't know. It's being part of the plagues. It's not mixed with mercy. This is in the close of probation. You know, chapter 15 that opens these 7 last plagues gives us a scene of where the sanctuary is closed. There's no mediation going on.
Yeah.
So.
No, I understand that it's not a third, but it's, even though it's been divided into thirds, it includes all three parts. So nobody's escaping. But I'm just wondering if something different happens on each of the three parts, which all results in the same thing. But I'm just curious, that was all.
Well, we're not told what happens to these three parts.
Okay.
Just that part of the judgment is that it's divided into three parts.
Sorry, what was the reference for Jeremiah?
Jeremiah 51, verse 63 and 64.
Thank you.
Can someone read that out for us?
It shall be when thou hast made an end of reading this book that thou shalt bind a stone to it and cast it into the midst of the Euphrates. And thou shalt say, thus shall Babylon sink and shall not rise from the evil that I will bring upon her, and they shall be weary. Thus far are the words of Jeremiah.
So again, in this one, the river Euphrates is used in this type of the destruction of Babylon. And if we can jump to Isaiah, the book of Isaiah, and can somebody read Isaiah 44, verse 27 through to chapter 45, verse 4.
Verse 44, verse 27 starts, that saith to the deep, be dry, and I will dry up thy rivers. That saith of Cyrus, he is my shepherd and shall perform all my pleasures, even saying to Jerusalem, thou shalt be built, and to the temple thy foundation shall be laid. Verse 45, chapter 45, thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden, to subdue nations before him, and I will loose the loins of kings, to open before him the two-leaved gates, and the gates shall not be shut. I will go before thee and make the crooked places straight. I will break in pieces the gates of brass and cut in sunder the bars of iron. I will give thee the treasures of darkness and hidden riches of secret places, that thou mayest know that I, the Lord, will call thee by thy name, as am the Lord God of Israel. For Jacob my servant's sake and Israel mine elect, I have even called thee by thy name. I have surnamed thee, though thou hast not known me.
So what events is this speaking of here?
That's when Cyrus went in and took Babylon. The river Euphrates dried up and his army marched in. And
we got that reference here at the beginning that the river was dried up. It doesn't mention the Euphrates by name. It just says, you know, thy rivers. I will dry up thy rivers. But again, in each of these cases we've looked at, when something's happening to the Euphrates, it's a way of speaking of a judgment that is going to fall on Babylon. And so the Euphrates is what's mentioned when the judgment is coming upon Babylon. So when we jump back into Revelation 9:13, and we hear these four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates are to be loosed, that there is this judgment that is to break forth on Babylon, on this spiritual Babylon that is existing there. And as we saw on that map before, that the extent that the Ottoman Empire continued to spread into Europe, completely destroyed what was left of the Eastern Empire. I'll just show that graphic again. You can see that was the extent of the Ottoman Empire. Went right up to sort of the borders of Italy. So whereas the fifth trumpet, where it was to torment but not kill, it took over much of it, but it did not destroy the Eastern Roman Empire. Whereas under the sixth one, they had power to kill, and they killed that Eastern Empire. Can someone read from verse 16 through to 19? Revelation 9, verse 16 to 19.
And the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000. And I heard the number of them. And thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire and of jacketh and brimstone. And the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions, and out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone. By these three were the third part of men killed, by the fire and by the smoke and by the brimstone, which issued out of their mouths. For the power is in their mouth and in their tails, for their tails were like unto serpents, and had heads, and with them they did hurt. They do hurt.
Now, we looked at last week, there are a lot of similarities between what is described there under the sixth trumpet and what we read before under the fifth trumpet, with the locust being in the shape of horses, having the teeth of lions, rushing many chariots. Very similar descriptions, except here, everything is bigger, is better, it's stronger. Rather than scorpions' tails, it's serpents for tails. Where they just had a large amount of horsemen. Here it's 200,000 was the number that he heard. 200 million horsemen is the number that he heard. This speaks of an absolutely massive army. And for more historical accounts, this matches the Ottomans quite well. They were known for having massive armies of horsemen. One record in a commentary I was reading, someone living in North Africa, when the Ottoman army was passing through, it took 6 days 6 days for the convoy of cavalry to walk through the city. There's absolutely massive amounts of horsemen in their armies. Now, when it speaks of their breastplates, here in the King James it says of fire, of jacinth, and of brimstone. But I had different Bible verses. I will share. Where have I got it? Here we go. If I pull up a couple of different versions here. If you can see the NIV there, it translates as the horses and riders I saw in my vision looked like this. Their breastplates were fiery red, dark blue, and yellow as sulfur. The heads of the horses resembled the heads of lions, and out of their mouths came fire, smoke, and sulfur. So it was fiery red, dark blue, and yellow as sulfur. That these were the colors that their soldiers were described as having. NLT also goes along this line. ESV, that the color of fire sapphire and a sulfur. So a lot of these seem to indicate that it's actually referring to the color of them. And when we look at the actual word itself there for fire, it's actually not the same word used for fire elsewhere. It's fiery instead of being referred to as fire. So that seems to indicate that the bracelets were this fiery color. Jacinth is of course this dark blue, and brimstone is sulfur, which is a yellow. And I'm just going to share again. This here in this pictures is the Ottoman soldiers and a lot of what they wore. Many different pictures I found, but they were all similar. These were the colors they wore: blue, red, and yellow. So again, this matches up with what we've looked at referring to the Ottomans. Now, can somebody read chapter 9, verse 20 to 21?
And the rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues, yet repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship devils and idols of gold and silver and brass and stone and of wood, which neither can see nor hear nor walk, neither repented they of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts.
Now, what do you think that the message is that it gives us that after taking us through this sixth trumpet, the judgment of these Ottomans and the destruction of the Eastern Roman Empire? It finishes with that message. Galen.
Reminds me of the was it Thyatira that would not repent? That even though all this stuff has happened, they're still carrying on with their ways. They're Nineveh repented, although further on down the track, they were judged because they didn't repent. But they're just carrying on, it seems, blatantly in the obvious judgment that has come down. It's like, stuff it, I'm still doing what I want to do, kind of thing going on.
Margaret.
That's human nature, the stubborn human heart, because the Israelites, after Jesus died, the Pharisees, etc., still, I suppose they were still doing sacrifices, and they were still meeting in the temple and doing sacrifices even after the Lord had died. So that's just the stubborn human heart. We want to do it our way.
Petra.
Trials purify God's people, but trials for those who choose not to be God's people doesn't end up with them being purified.
I suppose like the trial could only refine, you talk about being tried in fire. And the idea of that is to to refine and purify the metal that's there to bring forth, you know, a better quality. But if you don't have, you know, as you're saying, for those that aren't God's people, there's nothing there to refine. Whereas God's people, they have that commitment to him, that character, that Christ-like character that gets refined in the trials. But with them, it's like it's just hardened their heart even more. They're still worshipping their idols, still worshipping devils and false gods. Galen.
So using the analogy of a refining metal, I mean, it's when you heat metal, it's the slag that, you know, all the impurities, the slag and stuff that you take off as it comes through. So with those that do not want to be refined as such, would it be a case of it's all impurity, so the whole lot gets taken out? There's nothing left in the furnace to be refined? Kind of.
Yeah, you can't refine slag.
Exactly.
Now, can somebody read chapter 11, verse 14?
The second woe is past, and behold, the third woe cometh quickly.
So what we looked at here, the sixth trumpet is the second woe in that last half of chapter 9, with the rise of the Ottomans and their the destruction of the Eastern Roman Empire and their attacks on the Catholic powers. That spanned from 1449 through to 1840. That's the time period that spanned there in chapter 9. But all of chapter 10 and chapter 11, right up into that verse, carries on. And at the conclusion of that, it says the second woe is past. So that part of chapter 11 and chapter 10 is all part of the sixth angel blowing its trumpet. And so next time we're going to start looking at that and seeing how that fits in to what we've looked at today, how it fits into that time period of this, or fits into rather this sounding of the sixth trumpet.